Welcome to the Optum RX Pharmacy Insights podcast. In this forum, we'll discuss the latest and most impactful events in pharmacy benefit management. Today's episode will focus on biosimilars and their impact on overall pharmacy spend. I'm your host, Scott Draeger. Today, I'm joined by Savitha Vivian, Senior Vice President of Formulary Management and Strategy at Optum RX. Welcome to the podcast, Savitha.
Thanks, Scott. It's a pleasure to be here.
The pleasure is all ours. Savitha, can you share with us a little bit about your professional background and what you're ultimately responsible for at Optum RX?
Sure. So I'm a pharmacist by training and have over 20 years experience in managed care, specifically pharmacy benefit management. And most of my experience within the pharmacy benefit management arena has been within clinical services. So I've been responsible for activities such as pharmacy and therapeutics committee processes, pipeline drug surveillance, as well as utilization management development. And currently I'm responsible for formulary management and strategy at Optum RX.
Great. Thank you for that. Let me begin from more of a foundational perspective. What are biosimilar medications? And really, should we think about these medications in the same way we think about traditional generic drugs?
So before we get to biosimilars and what generics are, I just want to spend just a few minutes just talking about what a biologic is, because that may not be apparent to everyone. So biologics are a type of drugs that's produced by a living system or organism. And because of this, they're very large, they're complex molecules, and sometimes even a mixture of molecules. And because of this complexity, their exact structures are not easily identified or characterized. And so in contrast, non-biological drugs, sometimes we refer to them as traditional drugs, they are typically manufactured through chemical synthesis, which means that's made by combining specific chemical ingredients in an ordered process. Think of it as a kind of a precise recipe. So every time you follow the recipe, you end up with the same exact chemical. So when you have a generic of these traditional molecules, because you know exactly how those molecules are made, the generic is an exact copy of that non-biologic drug. Biosimilars, on the other hand, are a highly similar version of the existing FDA-approved biologic, known as the reference product. So although a biosimilar might not be the exact molecular structure, we're confident through clinical studies and evaluation that the biosimilar has no clinically meaningful difference when compared to that reference biologic.
How long have biosimilars been available in the marketplace?
So biosimilars first came to the market in Europe. And in the US, biosimilars came into the market back in 2015 and is becoming well established and accelerating across multiple therapeutic areas. Today, the FDA has approved 30 biosimilars, of which 21 have actually launched into market.
So when you look at that traditional side of medications that you mentioned before, at least for most brand products, they can be substituted by a pharmacist, for that equivalent generic product, really without the physician's permission. Is that the case with biosimilars as well?
Well, the reason that a traditional generic product can be substituted is that the generics of non-biologic drugs are approved by the FDA through a process called an abbreviated new drug application, where the generic product has to demonstrate that it is bioequivalent or exactly the same in behavior in the body to that reference brand. Once approved by the FDA through this pathway, generics have the ability to be automatically substituted for the brand by the pharmacist at the point of dispensing without a call to the prescriber for a new script. Biosimilars, on the other hand, because they're not the exact same, they're highly similar, they require a specific designation by the FDA as an interchangeable biosimilar to be eligible for that substitution ability at the pharmacy without the physician's permission.
Savitha, for our listeners, can you give us some examples of biosimilars that are maybe on the market today and maybe what conditions these products treat?
Yeah, so the majority of the biosimilars that are available on the market today fall under the medical benefit because of the type of conditions that they treat. So what we have available today primarily is focusing on oncology. So we have biosimilars for the reference brand called Herceptin. We have biosimilars for oncology supportive care. So things like anemia due to chemotherapy. There's a drug called Neupogen, and there's biosimilars available for that. And then there is biosimilars for Remicade, which is an infusible immunology drug for rheumatoid arthritis. However, we're starting to shift from the medical benefit to the pharmacy benefit. And an example of this is the most recent biosimilar that's been introduced for insulin, which is called Lantus.
It seems that, over the last year especially, the discussions around biosimilars have seemed to reach a new level of intensity. From my perspective, much of this has been driven by the emergence of biosimilar alternatives within the chronic inflammatory class of medications, specifically drugs used to treat conditions like rheumatoid arthritis or psoriasis. What types of biosimilar alternatives can patients expect to see over the next year or so for medications that treat these conditions?
In the next year or two, we're going to see most widely utilized specialty products in the US becoming available as a biosimilar. And this really enables a much more sizable and impactful bottom line savings because these agents are used much more frequently and in a chronic manner compared to some of the biosimilars that I just went over. So Humira is one of the most anticipated launches because it's one of the top utilized specialty drugs and a trend driver for many payers. Other significant launches we're going to see within the next year or two are other immunology products such as Actemra and Stelara, which address some of the conditions that you talked about, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis. And we're also going to see additional launches with regards to biosimilars in the insulin space, specifically Novolog.
Savitha, I heard you reference savings a few minutes ago. How do you expect these options to be priced, at least in comparison to their brand counterparts?
So it's going to vary from drug to drug. It's going to depend on how many biosimilars are going to be made available or enter the market for a given reference brand. The more competition, the greater opportunity to drive down cost.
You talked about interchangeability a few minutes ago. Specifically when you're talking about this market event, specifically around Humira. Will all of the Humira biosimilar alternatives be granted that interchangeability status?
Short answer, no. And this is dependent on whether the manufacturer is going to conduct the appropriate studies that demonstrate switching from reference brand to biosimilar and back to the reference brand has no meaningful impact on efficacy. The manufacturers then have to submit the data to the FDA, and then the FDA has to grant that specific interchangeability status. So for Humira, there are 7 approved biosimilars that were anticipating launch at various time points next year. Of these, 1 has been granted that interchangeability status. 1 I know is pending approval, and a couple more are conducting the necessary studies to then submit to the FDA to get approval for that interchangeability status.
You talked about the fact that at least with the biosimilars here that are going to come out early 2023, at least from comparatively speaking, the utilization here is much higher than some of the other biosimilars that are on the marketplace today. How receptive do you think physicians and ultimately members will be to biosimilar alternatives?
The prescribers and members, their comfort level is a critical barrier to the adoption of biosimilars. If we think back, a couple of decades ago when generics for traditional meds became a prevalent occurrence or when they first started coming to the market, it took a lot of education by the pharmacist, by the health plan, by the PBM to increase that comfort level that generics are a exact copy of the traditional medication or the reference brand, and that there should be no issues in terms of differences in safety or efficacy. Similar education has to occur here in the biosimilar landscape as well. And there has been an increase in education for both the prescriber and members. And we've seen that this has led to confidence in using biosimilars in new to therapy patients. However, there's still some hesitation in switching patients who are stable on therapy, and especially in complex disease states like rheumatoid arthritis or even oncology. And we really need that data that shows that there's no additional risk with switching therapies in a stable patient, especially in these hard to control chronic conditions. And this is what's needed, I think, to boost member and provider confidence. Some of this data is available. We're looking to the European experience and utilizing real world evidence to help instill that comfort in both members and providers.
Do you think payers will dramatically alter how they encourage the use of biosimilars, at least compared to how they encourage use of lower cost medications today?
I think payers are looking for lowest net cost, and whether that's through the innovator brand with discounts or whether that's through a lower cost biosimilar, I think at the end of the day, they're looking to see how they can reduce their bottom line costs. And so what we're seeing is that sometimes through the launch of new biosimilars, we're seeing sometimes based on that net cost, it's the biosimilar that gets formulary placement, and other times it's the innovator brand, depending on the cost that's negotiated for those brands.
Savitha, as you look out over the next 10 years, what does the pipeline for biosimilars look like?
Well, the good news is the biosimilar pipeline is robust and it continues to grow. If it's any evidence of what's happened in the past 7 years, the number of biosimilar products in development has increased on an average of about 12% per year, and overall has more than doubled during this time frame. So I think the future holds huge opportunities for better cost and value, and upcoming biosimilars for chronic conditions such as RA, such as Humira that's coming next year, along with others, present a great opportunity to impact chronic conditions that present a burden to a broad patient population in the healthcare system overall.
Savitha, I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you very much for spending some time with us today.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks for listening to the Pharmacy Insights Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Draeger. Tune in again for more discussions as we examine the most important issues in pharmacy care services.